In the beginning. The Bible opens with words that echo through all the great stories of our childhoods. Like the beginning of a fairy tale, they set the scene for a tale of epic adventure and drama, of sorrow and loss, of redemption and reconciliation, of grace and justice. A tale of a great prince who comes to rescue his bride from the clutches of a fierce dragon. But unlike the stories we heard as children, this one is true. It's a story that actually happened and continues to unfold. A story that doesn't begin once upon a time, but in the beginning. A story that only God can tell because however else you describe it, it's a story of hope. And it's a story that can only begin with in the beginning because the only one who knows the beginning is the one who was there before the beginning. The one who made everything. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. How did this God make the world? Did he take pre-existing material and reshape it? Did he set about a chain of events that led to the gradual development of the world as we know it? God did something even more miraculous, something that seems too simple to be true, but is. He spoke. Let there be. And with a word, whatever he called into existence was. Everything, from the smallest subatomic particles that make up your body, to the earth under your feet and the air you're breathing, to the sun and the stars that give us light. God created all of it. Over 6 days, creating a rhythm of work and worship, he spoke all things into being, and as each appeared, he declared it good. And in the end, everything was good. All of it was glorious. The world he made radiated his presence because it was his, and he delighted in it because it was exactly the way he wanted it, including the pinnacle of his creation, people, human beings. Let us make man in our image according to our likeness, God said, and he did. A man, formed from the dust of the earth by God's hand. A woman, formed from the side of the man to be his partner in the shared calling to be fruitful and multiply and steward the world God had made, to create, to communicate, and form communities, to harness the earth's resources to aid in the flourishing of their descendants, to bear his image throughout creation, to be his representatives, to reflect his goodness and graciousness to the ends of the earth. And God called these people he had made not just good, but very good. They were glorious. They radiated his presence. They were his. And he delighted in them, and they delighted in him because they were exactly the way he wanted. Together they were a beautiful picture of something even more beautiful, God's community. Before the beginning, before God created the heavens and the earth, before he created human beings in his image, before anything was created, God simply was. Everything that makes God God was already present. His nature, his power, his plans, his character, all of it. And in the beginning, when God already was, he already had community. Joyous, unbroken fellowship between three persons who are all fully and equally God. Not three separate gods, not 3/3 that make up a whole. One God who is three persons. The Father, the maker of the heavens and the earth. The Spirit, who hovered over the waters of the earth during their creation. The Word, through whom all things were made, and all things continue to exist, and in whom God delights. God's perfect community, a community that didn't need us, but one our Creator invites us to experience as his beings made in his image, according to his likeness. One he invites us to experience through the Word, who came into this world and dwelt among us, who is more than an image bearer, but is the image of God, the exact expression of his nature, who reflects God's glory into all creation by giving up his life for those he dearly loves. The Word, the prince in the story God is telling, who came to rescue his bride from the clutches of a fierce dragon. The story that begins in the beginning.
Well, good morning. We'll kind of see how this goes. This is the first week for all of us, so I appreciate a little bit of patience. I'm particularly a little worried about where I stand if you can't see some of the PowerPoint. I will not always have PowerPoint, but today in particular, because of the subject matter of creation, I wanted to make sure I had an opportunity to have it. So, also, I know with one mic in a big room it gets a little challenging, but this really is supposed to be participation. I'm not up here to preach. So I'm going to ask questions, and I would appreciate it if you guys will answer them. You know, and if some of you have loud voices, no problem. Jenny's going to walk around a little bit with a microphone in case we feel like maybe we can't hear it. But this really is about back and forth. And particularly in the next several weeks, I think there should be a lot of discussion as we talk about the excitingness of what we see with God's creation. I will say, it's a little bit of deja vu because in the junior high, the middle school this year, we've been focusing on creation and Bob's teaching, so we're about through the first 3 verses of chapter 1 of Genesis. But, okay, it's a little bit off. We are through the first couple chapters, but we are talking about creation, and it's exciting to hear and the questions we get, and we'll be amazed sometimes the questions the middle schoolers will ask as they think about creation, and particularly about what they're being told in school. And that doesn't make necessarily the wrong thing, but kids are challenged at an early age, and they're kind of, you know, hey, this is what the book says, and kids are kind of, at this age, some of them are wrestling with, hey, the book says, for example, I don't believe the earth is billions of years old. I just don't. Textbook says, hey, 1 billion years ago, blah, blah, blah. And all that, you know, that you guys don't, you know that's the way this goes. But it's a neat opportunity to kind of talk and back and forth with the middle schoolers. And that's kind of what we hope to have here. And you know, I'm now approaching, 50 years old, and there's stuff I read now, and I'm like, oh, I never thought of it that way as I dig in. So some of this stuff may be a new concept to you. Some of it is not. We will not all agree on everything. That's okay. We want to get in and discuss. And an exciting thing as we talk about is creation. So the first, and again, this may be a little bit challenging trying to tie to the computer, the PowerPoint, the microphone, so we'll work through this together, but the God who creates. In the beginning, God. Now, when you see those letters, in the beginning, God, some people immediately go to something like this, and I thought about Joseph in particular. But some people think of it as this, a Star Wars thing. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And unfortunately, people look at in the beginning God as just another story. Oh, that's the Star Wars crawl. That's which I'm not a big Star Wars guy, but Joseph, I immediately thought of you. But it's not the same because Star Wars is, in fact, you talk about science fiction, but we look at it differently. We look at in the beginning God as a hugely important part of the Bible. And it makes us start thinking things like, for example, the first question is, why are those four words so crucial to understanding all of reality? Now, the video went into a little bit about some of the stuff we're challenged with. But it kind of blows your mind a little bit to think about, he talked about that God was there before anything else. And I mean, that's not something that's just challenging to a 10-year-old or 12-year-old to think about those concepts. That, because we have finite minds, we can't always understand. And there is faith there. It's not blind faith, but there is some faith. So to you guys, some of you guys, why are those 4 words so crucial to understanding all of reality? You can just list off a couple things of what it means to you when you see in the beginning God. Okay.
One guy I studied, and he said he studied all the religions. He said all the other religions start with a God in creation that already exists. And up until 70 years ago, all the scientists and big thinkers didn't think
Okay. All right, we'll get a microphone. Okay, so Jenny, after maybe if you have something and they couldn't hear you in the back. So no, that's okay. That's okay. But Gerald's basically saying a lot of the other religions, there's a God that's there already at the time, that already right.
Yeah, that exists.
That and the difference with what we believe is that God created everything out of nothing, right? And and sometimes people look at that and think only small-minded people can think that way. You must not be very smart. You must have checked your brains in at the door. In fact, there was a guy on NBC News that took a lot of heat just in the last week named Chuck Todd, and this was in context of politics, so but there was an interview back and forth on stuff, and it was not necessarily about creation, but it was about Noah's Ark. And he said, you show me somebody who's small-minded enough to believe in Noah's Ark, and I'll show you a Trump supporter. And that was his quote, and he took a lot of heat and actually offended. What he didn't realize was he offended a lot of Jews, even Muslims, because there is the story of that in what we'd say the story in those three faiths. But the point is, we're looked down upon believing something in Scripture as small-minded. And, those are only the people that would do such and such kind of thing. But we know that those four words mean everything because God did create everything. And we shouldn't feel embarrassed or ashamed to think, sometimes that blows our mind because as I think about it, that means different things to me at different times about the fact that God was always here. That's kind of an amazing concept.
I think too, Eric, we're like to protect this God because when you create something,
Right. And we're going to get there. Exactly.
Eric, can I add
Yes.
something?
Yes.
You said that only people with a small mind can accept that. I challenge that as just the opposite. Because the people with small minds have to have facts and
Right.
data and support it.
Right.
We have to accept the fact that this is unbelievable. This is
Right.
impossible.
So Mary basically said it's not small-mindedness. It's the fact that you can, some of those people that she believes have to have exact facts for everything, where we can have a faith to believe some of this stuff that's not small-minded to think about that. Yeah.
From a slightly different angle.
Yes.
I hear or read the words in the beginning, and it makes me think first things first. And just seeing in the beginning God, I think serves as a reminder to first things first. God, you want a starting point for any conversation.
Yep.
How the world is, what the world is, why things are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The starting point has to be God.
Right. So Joseph said first things first, starting point of God. Exactly. So we'll talk about that. If you can see the PowerPoint, and I apologize, I'll try to move around, but there are many that are claiming creation didn't occur. Why is that? And in fact, some people would say that, I would argue that if you're an evolutionist, that is some kind of other religion, right? They claimed, you guys, religion is a crutch, blah, blah, blah. But some are claiming creation didn't occur. Some have specific motives. I think some don't have specific motives. They just aren't people of faith. And as Mary said, they look for specific facts. And if they can't back up every single one, then they kind of hold up their hands and say, I don't know, but it must be evolution. But this is the key, is we suddenly can find ourselves in great conflict with the worldview. And we need to make sure we're aware of that. And it's how we approach that. It's not always easy. For example, what I tell my kids is, listen, I'm hoping you don't believe what they're saying in biology class about this or 8th grade science or whatever, but you should be respectful in how you present your case, because you can't just hit people over the head with the Bible, because if they're not believers, that's not giving them any reason to believe. It's how you react to that. And we have to know, this more and more, we're going to be in conflict with worldview on stuff. And there's certain things that blow our minds about. We were just on vacation, and we went to, my oldest son and his wife went to the church. We love the church we go to there. It's a big church. And because of the holiday, my wife loves to listen to the pastor that's there. She watches online every week and listens to his messages. And because of the Christmas break, he wasn't preaching, and we had to settle for Joe Stoll. Can you imagine being disappointed that you had to settle for Joe Stoll? But he talked about some of the challenges, and he preached, he's talking about specific things that blow our mind, like, for example, Moses not being allowed into the promised land because of a disobedience, and how he says, honestly, that's part of Scripture I almost wish weren't there, because we think about a guy, that amazing, father of one of the fathers of our faith. That do push evolution, and I think there's specific reasons. Number one, they would say, and this kind of goes with what Barb was saying, it's random, it's not orderly. It kind of gives people an out clause for how they can act a certain way. My wife and I have this discussion of, you name the topic, and we'll sit around the dinner table and say, well, I can understand why they may have that answer. They're not a believer. Why would they look at the world the way that believers do, kind of thing? It's amoral. Oh, it's okay. I mean, think about where we are versus 50 years ago, as far as turning on the TV, what's being pushed, all the things along with that. A lost respect for life and all that matters. A cheapening of life kind of thing. But if you don't believe God created and that we are absolutely made in the image of God, then you're going to look at life differently than those that are believers, that we look at life differently. And we should. And this is just some of the, honestly, I'm not trying to be political here, but this is some of the stuff I think is important. In the U.S., there's called 1,850 abortions a day at this rate. 61 million since Roe versus Wade in 1973. Worldwide in 2020, we just started. 320,000 of babies have already been aborted in the first week of the year. And 1.5 billion since about 1980. Now, I used to travel to China quite a bit for business. And occasionally, China is a very populated city with strict population control. And I remember at one point we were out doing some testing of a product. And it was amazing because we had a model airplane, which, attracted a bunch of kids' attention. We realized there's like 15, 16 boys that come running up. There's not one girl. And suddenly hit because, you know what? They've aborted the girls, or frankly, infanticide still happens over there in some places because there's not the same. We look at a woman and say, made in the image of God. We look at a man and say, made in the image of God. They don't look at it that way. So is it coincidence or is it creation when we talk about this? You guys have all seen stuff like this, I think, but the earth is precisely the right distance from the sun, closer and the water would evaporate, like Venus, further and everything would freeze, like Mars. The perfect amount of gravity, for some of us as we get older, maybe a little too much gravity. The perfect amount of oxygen. I've seen that they've said that, if there were more oxygen, every lightning strike would cause massive fires everywhere all the time. Just up in the mountains of Colorado, where there's always the danger of fire, and it can scare you. And I remember when we were there in July, we were last there. We had an amazing lightning storm, and my son said, "Boy, I hope we get some rain with this because this makes me a little nervous being up in the woods." But it would be much worse if there was even more oxygen. It's the perfect amount. And this is something we don't always think about when we say God created. But sometimes I think we think a little differently about Jesus' position. And we just come out of the Christmas season. We think about Jesus arriving as a little baby. But the fact is, the Son is before all things, and He created all things. And Colossians 1 says that. God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit were present at creation. All three, the perfect Trinity, kind of like what the video talked about. Sometimes there's this thought of, well, the Holy Spirit came at Pentecost. It wasn't there until then. And Jesus came at the time of His birth in Bethlehem, and it was just God before that. And that is not the way it works. And I know in our minds, that's something that's sometimes hard for us to fathom, but the fact that Jesus, the Scriptures say the Son is there before all things, and He created all things. And that ex nihilo, out of nothing. God created everything from nothing. Everything in existence came because of Him. Rocks, trees, the very air that we breathe. but also the intangible realities such as courage, love, laughter. Every good thing came because God created it. And that is hard to believe because, as humans, we make things. Some of us are very talented. I am not. Some people can paint. Some people can write music. But we're taking something that's here already. When God created everything out of nothing, there was nothing. He had to do it out of nothing. So just the brief, this is day 1 through 7, obviously. Obviously, we sit here with the middle schoolers and we go through verse by verse, and you can kind of see some of this. I mean, frankly, our middle schooler, you guys, we've said this before, over half of them don't come to our church, probably 2/3, so they're here on Wednesday nights. So some of this stuff was new concepts and completely foreign to them and in opposition to what, they would hear about in school. But light is day 1. The atmosphere and the firmament in day 2. Dry ground and plants, day 3. The sun, moon, and the stars, day 4. This is when you're in this. When it gets clear on a clear night. One of the great things about living in a smaller rural community is, and I know Pastor Paul. In fact, you'll see later. I stalked his Facebook page and took some of his pictures to show. But the amazing things you get to see in the evening, like the stars. It really is, it's amazing. And there's something about looking at that, and maybe it's just me, you look at that, and there is absolutely something, a connection for me to see the glory of God and what he put out there for us to see. It's just amazing. The birds and sea animals. And Bob started talking about this a lot and was talking about when think about Adam having the responsibility of naming these animals. I mean, the kids kind of looked around and thought, yeah, I guess how did they get named? Well, Bob talked about how all that worked, and, this looked like such as that. I don't know exactly how Adam did it, but he had an idea of the way something looked, and he called it what it was. Land animals and humans. And, of course, on day 7, the Lord rested, not because he needed to. Creating the world didn't tire out our God. It was a good example for us. We use the word create when we cause something to come into being, but we always form something out of other things that were previously existed. We create music using notes out of art, out of paints and canvas, books from words, language, paper, and binding. God, however, created everything out of nothing. Now, this is where, and there's a little chart, if you have the book, there's a little chart here that shows how you can kind of see Jesus all the way back in Genesis. And again, sometimes we kind of probably too strictly think, well, this is the Old Testament, this is God the Father. Then we get to the New Testament, we think of God the Son and Jesus. But there absolutely is a tie-in in every way, as we're going to talk about. The first Adam. Obviously, God created man, among them Adam. And we know man ultimately fell in the fall of sin. And Romans 5 talks about the second Adam. We talk about, let me read just a little portion here. Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. For sin indeed was in the world before the law was given, but sin is not counted This is God saying through his word, ultimately Jesus would be the atonement for that conflict of the serpent when he showed up and had Adam and Eve to eat of that apple or the fruit. This is the response to that ultimately God's saying way back in Genesis 3 that he had the answer for that. And this is basically the first gospel or messianic prophecy that there is. If you murder somebody, there's a higher penalty than if you killed a cat. I mean, that's just the way it goes, because even society says, for the most part, not always, society says, the value of, now I'm not talking about, there's some of the groups that want, to go to jail for killing turkeys on Thanksgiving, all that stuff, but thankfully that has not happened. But even society tends to look at human life as being more valuable than animals, for the most part. Anything else?
We also see, I'm sorry, we also see stories of people who actually survived their own abortion.
Yeah.
A child that was trying to be aborted was not, but God had a purpose
Right.
for that person, because you see, their story is now being told on how much God valued them, and they're using that story to bring God's truth to others.
Yeah. And you think a little bit about like Joseph, right? Where he says what God meant, what man meant for evil, God meant for good. That type of same thing.
I think we are called to be stewards of our environment and planet, but I think people deny the pinnacleness of manhood by trying to elevate
Right.
the creation.
Right. Worshiping the creation instead of the creator, in fact. Yes, agreed. So there was something different about the way God created man versus the animals, right? I mean, and we talk about this a lot in the middle school. God specifically formed man and breathed into his nostrils and so forth. There was something much different. The video talked about that too, about ashes to ashes, dust to dust type thing. So even in the creation of man, it was much different than it was in the other animals. And God called the creation that he made good, but what did he refer to man as? Very good. A different.
I don't mean to split hairs here,
Yes.
but does he refer to man as very good, or does he refer to all that he created once man has been created?
Yeah.
I think it's the latter. I think it's some, if I'm remembering the passage. So, while I think that speaks to the very goodness of man, I think it
Sure.
speaks to the very goodness of man as the final piece of the whole.
And yes. And in fact, this next slide says talk about the crown jewel of his creation was to come, and that was when he did create man in a very unique way. And this is where I went back to saying God began by forming Adam from the dirt, shaping him, breathed life into his nostrils. Being made in God's image means we're meant to be relational creatures. We just are. We're different than the animals.
Eric, you see
Yes.
a lot of, right now, the worldview that's counter to this is really strongly opposed to man's dominion over the earth, man's, if you want to call it man's specialness to God.
No question.
Even the environmental movement, the social justice movement.
Right.
A lot of this
Right.
points to, we don't believe man is anything other
Right.
than just an animal.
In fact, some would say worse because we're killing the universe or the earth. Roger.
In actuality, I think what we're seeing is the fruit of the very point that we started with at the very beginning. We don't have a basis from which to begin. Chaos can become normal.
Right.
No foundation built.
So who would have thought that 25 to 50 years ago it would be controversial to take literally the verse Genesis 5:2? And I've colored this to say the part now that can be offensive. When you say he, I remember I was at Illinois State almost 30 years ago, and I had a history. It was a history class. First day, and the lady said, "I just want you all to know God is female." And I'm thinking to myself, this is U.S. history. I don't know how we got here. Anyway. He created them male and female. That can be offensive. And blessed them and called them mankind. Mankind is certainly offensive to some folks in the way that, they were rewriting now they're rewriting some hymnals, taking out any kind of making everything gender neutral. There are multiple offensive things in the verse in today's, I said, you hear this term woke culture. And You know, Julian Castro just recently decided he was dropping out. He's one of the 57 people running as the Democrats for the nomination. But his big thing was fighting for. And again, this is complete. And when you look at Genesis and all that, his big thing was he thought he was fighting for the rights of transgender women to have abortions. And even Bill Maher, who is an atheist liberal, said, okay, this is ridiculous. They don't even have a uterus. You know, this is how all this has changed in the last 20 to 30 or 40 years.
Hey, Eric, can I?
Yeah, sure.
Because I'm around people a lot who don't believe this kind of stuff. What would you say about the next verse in chapter 5? What should my response be when they say, like it says, Adam lived 930 years, Seth lived 912 years, and people today don't even live to be 100?
Well, the atmosphere completely changed after the flood. So if you think about it, and we'll get into this probably at some point, but the short answer to that is, if you look at the way that the atmosphere is completely guarded and there was all this water vapors and all this stuff, and at the time of the flood, when all that's part of the reason in my opinion the world flooded so much is because all this water came down from not just the seas but from around in other areas, and when that fell, the entire atmosphere changed, life expectancy, everything changed. I think that's my opinion on that.
Isn't somewhere in Genesis it says that after the flood that people would only live to be 120?
Well, it talks about an approximate time, and just like the scriptures talk about a generation is this and a time is this and so forth. So, but I'm telling you, the world changed so much after the environmental effects of that flood changed everything. And to me, that's an easy answer. So the original audience of Genesis they had different thoughts. If you think about who Moses has written this stuff down, they were probably not asking stuff like that we talk about, like the age of the earth or the science behind creation, all the stuff that we tend to think about. Think about where they came from, their background. They're likely asking, is our God the best God? I mean, they're in the middle of, think about where they've been and the various foreign gods that they've seen when they've been, enslaved. Is our God the real God? Is he the most powerful God? And there's lots of reasons they may have not thought so in times, right? Because of all the oppression they went through, all the things that had happened. So this was all a learning process for them. There was no question they believed in the world in which there was gods. It was, well, where does Yahweh rank among these other gods? And then we've got all these verses here, and we aren't going to go through them, but these are all verses specifically talking about God created. And if you guys want these verses, I can email them out to you. Let me know. But specifically talking about, some of these are very, very well-known texts. When he's having these conversations with Job, where were you when I set the world on its foundations? That type of stuff. Talking about the magnificence of God. And then I just wanted to show some pictures when I think about creation. Some of you, I don't know, this is one of the most recognizable photograph places in all of North America. Anybody know where this is? Joe Anderson's been there. This is Maroon Bells in Aspen, Colorado. And that is just taken with my phone. That's how amazing. I will tell you, it's much more glorious in person. That is just with my iPhone. Boom. Just took it out of my pocket. So that's Pikes Peak on the right. Right now it's covered in snow, but that was in the summer of July. Again, I just took out my phone. It is absolutely glorious. To the left, those are aspens. They are just magnificent to see in person. Some of you have been here. I know Mike and Becky McDivitt, a bunch of others. That's Maranatha, Bonnie Aarons. Maranatha, a sunset I captured, and this was just a second, or maybe a minute later. The just glory of the Lord when you see stuff like this. That's just a mule deer, just a regular occurrence when you're in the mountains. Pastor Paul, this is from his Facebook stuff that he did, is around here when he see these hawks and these amazing creatures that we see. Wasn't that long ago, I was driving south to Champaign. First time I've seen this on 47, had a bald eagle. Never seen that around here other than in captivity. But I would not want those talons on me. Pastor Paul's, again, of the moon. And the scriptures talk about, when you talk about creation, but other parts about the moon and the vastness. Again, Pastor Paul of a duck. The colors. I'm colorblind, and I can even see some of the amazing colors on that. Mule deer, again, I took that just a few feet from me. They just walk almost right up to you. On the right was my daughter-in-law caught that. That was a bear. She was going to work one morning in Colorado Springs, down where she was. God made things for our enjoyment too. And my kids would say, absolutely, God made these mountains for us to snowboard on. And this is Monarch Mountain in northwest Colorado from last year when we were there. Joe's been here too. In fact, he did a lot of walking on this when Joe Anderson went on vacation years ago. This is Independence Pass. And it's not even open this time of year because it's closed. I think it opens up in early June. But Continental Divide. And you get up there and you look down, and again, as glorious as this picture is, it is nothing compared to having a 360-degree view of thinking, God created all this stuff. It's amazing to watch. This is like a cloud inversion where if you look below the clouds, you can't really see in this one. This is the first day we're on this trip, but 3,000 feet below these clouds is Colorado Springs. We're above them. Almost like when you're in an airplane. And then a lot of people have been here, right? This is Taurus. My son refused to go to play. Oh, we should even go. That's where tourists go. But we got to, and the creation, we always think about nature and so forth, but man being the pinnacle, families, all the stuff that God has given us. The purpose and design is to tell the glory of God, display plainly his power, his divine nature. When God created the heavens, the stars, the trees, the mountains, and the birds and the animals, they did their job well, and God called them good. How does creation testify? We only have a few. We're going to quit here in a couple minutes, but how does creation testify about the nature and character of God? What do you guys think of when you see creation? How does that testify to God's character? A plan. Not randomness. And I think of it as more amazing than you could even think of. Like God doing exceedingly above all that we could ever think or ask. When you see some of that stuff, you're like, I don't even know how God could even have a blueprint for something like that. It's so amazing. Okay, values community, loves beauty, 100% agree. An artist. Way more, right? Way more intelligent than any of us. So a couple minutes here. What are some of the amazing sites you guys have seen that you looked at and said, man, that's amazing? I know some of you went to Copper Island would probably say the scenery in Copper Island is beautiful. Other things. Newborn babies. Amazing.
It just goes on.
Right. Each stage of life. Grand Canyon.
Taking pictures from the Hubble telescope. As far as we think we can see, we always find something new.
Right. Yes. Flowers. Yeah, we're longing for spring at this point, right? Every detail. Yep. Sunrises and sunsets. And I joke around with my son about one thing. I said, we have one thing going for us that Colorado does not have, at least where he lives. They have no sunrise and sunset because the mountains are in the way. We see it all the way, and the harvest moons are amazing to look at.
The beauty of a full rainbow, a double bow.
A double rainbow. The oceans, everything. Right, waterfalls.
Ben and I, a couple years ago, had cliffs of over in Ireland,
Okay, yeah, right.
300 foot cliffs or something, and then it's just ocean. Even for me not being able to see it by the time we were there, the sound and smell
Right.
and the spray of the ocean, everything's even that high up, all of
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Yep. Roger.
I think everything we've just said and talked about testifies to the fact that man was created for this earth.
Agreed. Man was created for this earth. We're going to break up in the prayer groups here. So I don't know how. Yeah, go ahead.
I want you to see my face, so you can argue with me. Bob is holding his head like that.
Here.
Okay. 6 years ago, I would agree with everything, but I was challenged by an atheist at work, and I started looking at the science, and now I'm perfectly fine with the 14 billion years, and I can give you the names of leading scientists that are believers, and they will put together Genesis 1 and the scriptures, where science and Genesis 1 are just parallel tracks. And so, hey, I got the microphone, I might as well talk. My wife and I in our small church in Oklahoma worked with junior high and high school kids, led the youth, and I taught just the 6 literal solar days and creation just the way you see it. And then I had a pair of students, when they got in college, they got challenged. And now I hope they're at least agnostic and not atheist, because when they were challenged by science professors and teachers and everything in the university, and pretty much destroyed their faith. So I guess that's why I feel like I need to stand up here and say, you know, if you have a question why I believe, I can give you some scientists that will say that the Bible, Genesis, they take it literally, but they also are fine with the billions of years. And if you want to question where I stand and why I stand there, I'm welcome to discuss that with you. I can give you my email address, and I'm better at typing and than when I have time to think before I speak. So I just wanted to say that and let you see my face. And if you have a question why I believe what I believe, I'll gladly share that with you. Okay. Bob and I have had this discussion a lot on the golf course. And yeah, that's fine. It's not a salvation issue at all. And I think the only way, you know, I thought that Bob and I could settle this issue is maybe a putting contest. That would probably be it. Okay. Thank you.
And he's right. I've heard a lot of good dialogue between two good friends who can have a difference of opinion on this. Like Gerald says, it's not a salvation issue. But Jenny, how do you guys want to break up to do this? Is there a plan? Okay, so those that want to meet, you can find a place. Pray with those around you if you want. You can move off to the side, and those that have other things that they're maybe late for or whatever, you can sneak out the back. That's fine too. All right, thank you, everybody.
Eric,
Yeah.
we're going to have a quick meeting for the high schoolers back in the high school room as well.
High schoolers, quick meeting back there. Great.